Alrighty, hi ho all. Let's pick up with where we kind of left off before and talk about the aftermath of the Roosevelt administration. So in 1904, Teddy easily won re-election. The Democrats were going to nominate William Jennings Bryan again. They went a different direction and tried nominating a more conservative Democrat to, go against Teddy. He lost by 2.5 million votes. Um, Now, right after winning, Roosevelt announced that he would not seek a third term. Because remember, this is back before presidents weren't allowed to do that. He immediately regretted it because it created a situation where he became what is known politically as a lame duck. Um, that's a term for somebody who their time in office is basically ending and nobody pays attention to them anymore because they're going to be gone. So Teddy decided to try to do the next best thing because, before you ask, well, why didn't he just run again? Because Teddy was a man of his word. And that's something that we've really lost a sense of here that um, the idea that your word, your promise, what you say you're going to do is a badge of honor and it's a sacred oath that you are bound to keep. So instead, Teddy selects his Secretary of War, former Governor General of the Philippines and terror of water buffaloes, William Howard Taft, to be the new Republican president. I know they still have to go through the election, but Teddy anoints him. So if you even see in this political cartoon here, you have the picture of Emperor Teddy picking his boy Taft to be the next president. Look at that face. Only a mother could love that face. I'm just telling you right now, if my kid looked like that as a little kid, there'd be some serious plastic surgery going on. And this cartoon is really interesting in a couple of ways because you have, the reaction of the people all cheering and excited. But in the background here, you can see the scheming old Republicans, the old guard, who don't like the fact that Teddy is now the guy who's in control of the party and has changed the way that business is done. And so Taft easily beats William Jennings Bryan, who's yet back again. The only real issue was the non-issue of the Panic of 1907, an economic crisis that lasted like 12 weeks and then was over with really nothing happening. It's kind of interesting to note right now, too, or worthwhile to point out, that this whole series of elections involving William Jennings Bryan really highlight the fact that the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the book by L. Frank Baum, the thing that the movie is based on, is an amazing work of populist propaganda aimed at children. The whole concept that that this little girl from Kansas, and remember that Brian was from Nebraska, the state directly north of Kansas, which at one time Kansas and Nebraska were one state, that this little girl from Kansas can only return to the real, normal, good world of good people by going to see a magical wizard who lives in a great emerald city, which, by the way, emerald green is the color of money. And the only way to get to this great city of money is by going down a yellow brick, translation gold road. And then when she gets there, she discovers that all of her hopes and everything else that were being pinned on following this yellow brick road are in fact false because the wizard's a fake. It really is a moral lesson to try to get across to kids that the gold standard is really bad. It's a fake, it's a sham, and that what you really need to do is if you want true happiness, you have to rely on silver to get it for you. After Taft wins the election, Teddy heads off on a world tour slash safari. So you see in this picture this weird, creepy looking Hitler bellboy dude carrying Teddy's big stick. Well, look at little Teddy. Little Teddy is Teddy's policies. He's handing him off to the maid, Taft, by the way, the nanny that I don't ever want to see this kind of nanny outfit. That's terrifying. And you can see little baby Teddy at the policies. He's got his own little big stick there. And yeah, so the basic assumption is that Taft is going to be Teddy Jr. And this is really kind of how it's going to work. Now, Taft himself Taft was a lawyer before getting into politics. He is a very, very strict legalist lawyer. He is not um, a believer in law the same way that, let's say, Ulysses S. Grant was, which is, well, since the Constitution doesn't explicitly say I can do it, I can't do anything. Taft, however, was the person who basically would be like, there are specific powers delegated to different branches, and then there are some unspecified powers that have traditionally been used, and this is common law practice. That's okay. Um, his real biggest problem is that he's not Teddy. Everybody loves a jolly fat man. Everybody loves Santa Claus. You got actors like Chris Farley or John Candy or way, way, way before your time, Jonathan Winters. And you got comedians like, Jonathan Poignette or Sam Kinison, Louis, Louis Anderson. Um, all happy, jovial fat men, not Taft. And by the way, just to give you an idea, okay, look, okay, yeah. Okay, that's a big boy right there. He loved to golf, by the way. Now, I will say, as somebody who's larger, sometimes there are clothes that we can wear that are a little bit more flattering and respectful of our physiques or our gravitational challenge. This golf outfit is not one of them. That's just wrong on so many levels. Um, but getting back to Taft not being Teddy, he's not a jovial, happy fat man. He's very sort of reserved and kind of private, and he doesn't really like talking to the media, and he doesn't make friends easily and cultivate relationships the same way that Roosevelt did. Roosevelt was a salesman. Taft is not. Now, additionally, Taft is a progressive. Make no mistake about that. But he is a conservative leaning progressive. He is a free market progressive in terms of he falls in the line of that the government should allow or should break up big companies and should monitor the little ones using, best practices for this kind of thing, but that it's the government's responsibility to ensure the free market operates the way that it's supposed to. And he was also a big believer in the use of negotiation and arbitration, particularly between business and labor, to settle problems and disputes. Now, Taft's administration really, the big concern was, and he's only president for one term, mind you, his biggest concern was foreign policy and specifically protecting the canal zone. The irony of this is the stupid canal isn't even open yet, but Taft is all about monitoring that. He updated the way that the State Department ran itself, and he made sure that the U.S. kept out of Europe's affairs and that we enforced the Monroe Doctrine. Now, whereas Teddy had his big stick diplomacy, um, Taft doesn't sort of do that. He's perfectly willing to use the military, which we invade a couple of countries during his administration too. But Taft is much more of the opinion that if you'll borrow or if you'll use an old phrase, you catch more flies with honey than you do vinegar. Taft, by the way, that weird odd phrase came from St. Francis de Sales, the Bishop of Zurich, Switzerland. Maybe it was Geneva. I think it's Geneva. Um, he he believed that the best way to do foreign policy was not to threaten people; it was essentially to bribe them. The U.S. would offer guaranteed low interest loans and large amounts of business investment to countries willing to go along with what we wanted. Now, in theory, this sounds like a good idea. Let's say that Goodyear Tires wants to build a tire factory. They need access to rubber. Well, let's suppose that Costa Rica has rubber. The rubber's a plant, by the way. Um, so what Taft proposes is that Goodyear goes down and builds a factory in Costa Rica and buys the rubber directly there, which benefits the Costa Ricans. It'll employ Costa Rican people, which would help. Additionally, the U.S., because you're going to need roads and shipping berths and airports and stuff to ship things, the U.S. will loan money to the Costa Rican government at really low rates to allow Costa Rica to improve itself. And J.P. Morgan would be the man who would guarantee these loans and oversee the economic stimulus packages offered by U.S. banks to these countries. The idea was is that this would get people tied into America's economy. It would promote economic and political stability by assuring them that American investment was coming, provided that they kept the environment safe, clean, and appropriate for Americans to be there. Unfortunately, what it leads to is widespread corruption, particularly in Central and South America and the Caribbean, and also oddly enough in China. So what ends up happening is that, like, let's say that the U.S. is willing to invest $10 million in China. You are not going to go to China and directly split 10 million bucks up among all the Chinese people. Instead, you give $10 million to the Chinese government. The problem is that the government then takes the money for itself, and very little, if any, of it actually gets to the people where it's supposed to be going. This creates controlling groups of families or like linked, like basically wealthy clubs of people that are essentially oligarchies. And remember, an oligarchy is a dictatorship or a rule of the few. You have situations where, like, maybe 10 or 20% of the population is wealthy, and then the other 70, 80, 90% of it is absolutely poverty stricken. There's no middle class that develops in these countries. You either are super rich or you're dirt poor because of the way that the corruption works in the governments of these places, using and basically stealing US money that's meant for development. This leads to a lot of resentment, especially in the Caribbean, and the way that we militarily intervene to keep what we need going and to keep, our passages open and whatever else. These dictatorships formed, and they became like hereditary dictatorships where one leader would pass down rulership to his son or cousin or whatever else. And when you have like upwards of 90% of the people in dire poverty, these people want a way out. And what they do is they turn to Marxism as a way to get out of their poverty. Tomorrow, we will look at domestic policy under Taft. Peace and love.